Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
Art Carney is the winner, and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Glenda and Academy members, Carney earned 6 Emmys for the role of Ed Norton. He defeated Oscar for Al Pacino. However, when his renowned The Honeymooners co-star passed away in 1996, he made no statements at all. Word: everyone in Hollywood made a payment. Honor the family of Jackie Gleason sent. Former cast members sobbed on television. Art Carney said nothing. She had described him as polite and intelligent in her memoir. She hoped they would speak once again. One day they didn't. What took place was darker than anyone's between them was aware. November was Art Carney's birth month. Mount Vernon, New York. April 4, 1918, Hugh was one of 6 sons, youngest in a profoundly Catholic Irish family. His dad had a job that as a man of the newspaper. However, what influenced Art, the alcohol that poured through, was more enjoy water in their home. 3 of his older brothers drank. His dad also had a drink. As Art once remarked, most none of us boys smoked butt drinkers. Indeed, it wasn't merely a remark, it served as a warning. He began teenagers who drink, not just occasionally, regularly, but not socially. He maturated believing that drinking was a normal part of life. It wasn't a question of whether he would butt when he was gifted from an early age. He used impersonation as one of his strongest strategies. Roosevelt, Franklin D. He didn't simply seem similar to him. He was himself, the voice, the tone, the pause. Individuals that are listening to the president was believed by the radio to be communicating in reality. It became quite convincing that federal agents became involved. We were concerned that it could lead to confusion. Throughout the conflict, even foreign diplomats thought his performance was genuine. Speeches, although it was risky, it also made him famous. Later on, he made use of that speech on radio programs, imitating not just Roosevelt but Eisenhower and Churchill as well. By the age of 18, Carney had already playing with the orchestra of Horace Heights. Because of his older brother, it sounded glamorous. No, it wasn't. His flatmate was blind whistleblower Fred Lowry. Additionally, he brewed morning drinking and art together, not coffee, grapefruit juice and gin day. Initially it seemed like liberty, no guilt, no rules. However, that freedom soon turned into a prison. He was before he knew it. He was addicted. He distinctly recalled one instance. He was too inebriated to watch a live stream, even correctly spell the sponsor's name. Tums has stumbled through the advertisement. Sponsors were enraged. At age 23, he quit the band. Prior to his termination, then Aravet conflict, the 15th of August 1944, his 4th anniversary of the marriage. He was in France. Serving alongside the 28th Infantry Division, operating a machine gun. A mortar made in Germany exploded close by. The shrapnel ripped through his thigh on the right. He hadn't even fired his firearm yet. Never fired a shot, and later he quipped that he might not have wanted to. However, the injury was serious. His entitlement leg was ultimately 3/4 of an inch shorter than in his left. He hobbled the remainder of his. After 9 months of recuperation, one man with a profound wound and a purple heart, along with a medal, he brought home scars hidden from view. His limp was clear. It wasn't trauma. He took a drink. More barbiturates are what he utilized. He began consuming amphetamines. The conflict had continued. Just 2 months, yet the consequences, it went on forever. He experienced breakdowns, heckled and handled stress, and no one back then, they termed it PTSD, but that's what it was. There was even one breakdown in 1965 had him give up The Odd Couple. It would require him to wait over 30 years after Theo to become sober at last. Lately, Carney was all over the radio in the 1940s. He collaborated with Fred Allen, Milton Berle, Amsterdam, Maury. He was the preferred, the second banana as the sidekick. He was able to any joke, any voice. However, behind the microphone, he was consuming more alcohol than before. On air, he occasionally slurred. Occasionally he became dark. Nevertheless, they continued to employing him. His gift was too uncommon. His drinking was accommodated by the producers. Rather of facing it. Following Theuer, he had a serious issue. Could Aid as a limping man make it on TV? Had discovered a method. He had his shoes built to order. He balances his legs. However, he didn't simply keep the limp hidden, he put it to use. He succeeded a segment of his humor. His peculiar gaits, the dance moves weren't arbitrary. They were surviving. He transformed suffering into performance. His admirers were unaware. They simply chuckled. However, the truth persisted in its pursuit. Him. The drinking worsened. He had been on edge with Horace already. The Heights band, his drinking was no back in full force. As he departed Theband at the age of 23, not because he deserted as well, he did it out of necessity. He was alien. His addiction has already destroyed one bridge. Numerous others would adhere to. He experimented with stand-up comedy. It failed. It's not that he was humorous, but the stage scared him. The faces of the throng, the quiet pressure it made him anxious head rank in order to relax. Next, he took tablets to sharpen one's skills. Then he required more medications only to fall asleep. He had made anesthetipatin shame, drugs, and fear repeat. The same individual who invented radio. The celebs couldn't stand the spotlight. Alone. Even his private life was spooked. He wed his high school classmate, Jean Myers, my sweetheart, in 1940. They had 3 kids, Brian, Eileen, and Paul. However, the marriage broke down under the burden of addiction. Art Carney nearly didn't create history on television because he didn't think he fit in. In 1951, when radio journalists recommended him for a cavalcade sketch with Jackie Gleason, Carney believed that it was error. Gleason was a rising star already. Carney did not believe that Evan the Renowned knew who he was. It wasn't phony modesty, he had been silent, taking center stage as Newton Leasever on the show My Amsterdam. However, Hestel considered himself to be a little time. That mentality would influence all that came after. This man had a gift for may occupy a space, but he had his doubts himself all the way through. That the Honeymooners sketch evolved into Ed Norton was introduced to the world. His attire, pork pie, unbuttoned vest, and white t-shirt that turned into a symbol. However, behind the scenes, things didn't go as planned. Carney deserved excellence. He had faith in practicing each line, each gesture, each beat. He had too many thoughts. The magic would be ruined by practice. Carney would arrive prepared to practice Cleon Declan. Thus, Carney constructed Norton's character by itself. He even donned customized shoes to conceal a war-related limp from the absurd dances. The ideal, it was all Carney's timing. Practicing alone, motivated by stress, discomfort, and eventually pills. The life of Art Carney whilst the Honeymooners was being mad was not amusing at all. Every one of the 39 episodes' live footage was captured at the Adelphi Theatre in front of 1,000 people in Manhattan. That was enough pressure. However, Jackie Gleason made matters more difficult. He was well known for altering scripts just hours before to the performance. He thought that excessive practice would destroy that spontaneity. Thus, the actors frequently walked on that platform. With no knowledge of their lines, it was torment for Carney. He was meticulous. He required getting ready. However, he would receive brand stage directions and fresh lines just prior to passing in front of an actor. There was too much anxiousness. Secret visual signals were created by the cast to ensure one another's survival. Glean would, when he fails to remember a line, pat his stomach. Audrey Meadows' eyes would scan the refrigerator when someone needed to use it on TV. Everything appeared fluid. Yet Carney was barely holding it backstage. Collectively, he resorted to drinking to cope, as well as tablets, anything to ease the tension in his head. When the performance was cancelled, it seemed like a severe blow. In 1956, ratings had plummeted from second place in America is now at number 19. However, for it was a relief, really. Carney, no more stress, more last-minute before to live recordings. His supervisor Ed Norton stated that Glean has other ideas, and that Carney should not be included. To Carney's liking as well. At last, he was free and he put it to use. 1957 saw him make his The Rope Dancers made its Broadway debut. He performed as James Hyland, a damaged father who drinks. The play lasted for 189 performances and received 6 Tony Award suggestions. He was adored by critics. They claimed that he combined charisma, frailty, and grief like a pro, but few were aware of saying it wasn't a difficult role. Carney was already a heavy drinker. For years it had been. Then his most famous role on stage. In 1965, Carney Beckham Felix Anger's first appearance in the reverse of Neil Simon's The Odd Couple Walter. It was the ideal fit. Mattia was untidy. Carney was accurate. The success of the show was enormous. Detractors raved. Tony Randall, who subsequently performed Felix on television, referred to Carney's rendition as the first and foremost. Carney increased Felix more than a neat freak. He created him human, nuanced, humorous, and susceptible. Additionally, when Felix was later played by Jack Lemmon, he found it difficult to get away from Carney's shadow. However, while his personal stage work was flying, life was falling apart. By 1965, his union of 25 years was disintegrating. He and Jean Myers was the father of 3 kids in a lengthy history, yet it was unable to endure his addictions. For years, yet his actions turned into unpredictable and hazardous. She was unable to handle it. No longer that day the marriage terminated. Year followed by something even crazier. Art Carney started to change into Felix. Literally. He became obsessive actions that take place off stage. The most unsettling was he stacking coins. He would form a queue. Coins sorted by value, size, and color in his dressing room was filled with flawless patterns. Should even one be misplaced? Q was unable to take the stage. Co-workers began observing. They stated he failed to notice cues and that were postponed because he couldn't stop putting things in order. The distinction between the man and the character were blurred. Felix wasn't merely a role anymore, it was a cage. By only 7 months into the strange month of October 1965, Carney reached the lowest point of the couple's run. He experienced a complete mental and bodily collapse and admitted to a mental health facility, Hartford Hospital. He remained there for about half a year. He acknowledged divinity, including the drugs, booze, and disintegration. My first marriage, he remarked, was ending, and I wasn't feeling well. Art Carney has already demonstrated MC on Broadway. He was as intelligent as in The Odd Couple. Felix Anger earned accolades from reviewers, and even Tony Randall then claimed that Carney was the first and best. However, when it arrived its time for the 1968 movie adaptation, something terrible occurred. Instead, Paramount went with Jack Lemmon. They said that it had to do with box office attraction. However, Carney's theory was different. He thought that his previous collapse and his addiction had been publicly acknowledged, which had made his very dangerous, possibly uninsurable, for a production with a large budget, that he never stopped thinking. The movie continued to earn more than $44.5 million and turned into the film with the third highest gross of that year. Seeing it thrive without him wasn't merely disheartening, it tormented him. However, there were indications that deteriorating before Hollywood had turned away from him. Friends and co-workers became aware of anything. When Carney was feeling anxious, he began acting like Felix Anger. Off stage as well, his pocket would be stacked alteration on the dressing table in idle little towers, with the biggest coins facing up the bottom and the smallest at the top. It wasn't Tate was obsessed, not just strange. His surroundings were aware of its meaning. Who was slipping once more? They might observe their pattern. The more Felix-like he became, he was on the verge of another breakdown. Eventually, it was impossible to tell where Felix started and Carney stopped in 1966. Jackie Gleason then took up Art Carney on the phone. Carney had disappeared from society, imprisoned him at a haze of substance abuse and depression miscreant. However, Gleason desired Ed Norton's return, and that persona had endured forever. Within Carney, in spite of everything, Carney came back. Furthermore, when the Honeymooners Seville was broadcast during the Jackie, something amazing about the Gleason show occurred. The fans blazed. Norton's eccentric motions, clumsy dancing, and devoted they were better and had returned their charm. More so than before. What anyone anticipated was simply Carney would be excellent. In 1966 he earned his 4th Emmy. Next, his 5th in 1967. 1968 saw a 6th for 3 years. While barely holding 3 Emmys gathered himself. For the first time, musical numbers were added to the show. Carney made people laugh, danced, and sang. As though nothing was amiss. However, in private, later on he made a terrifying confession at that time. I was playing Ed Norton not only saved his career but also his existence. He had a purpose because of the character. When all the rest was crumbling, however, the brilliant lights of the show couldn't conceal what was taking place behind these. Following his time in the Carney had kicked pills in the sanitarium, but he was still in a chokehold from the alcohol. Between 1966 and 1970, the consequences were vicious. His look quickly shifted. He appeared decades older at 48. His hands shook. He shifted more slowly. Even makeup couldn't cover up their harm. It began to take longer and more time to get him ready for every scene. Carney was reportedly drinking a 5th of whiskey every day. Almost, that's excluding the dinners, wine or thine between takes. His mass would swing 30 pounds each way in weeks at times. He was unable to recall not even a rehearsal. Once Coast was discovered unconscious by Joyce Randolph. In his changing area. It wasn't the first time. The crew discovered how to manage these crises in a calm manner to preserve the show's pristine reputation. However, Carney was unraveling inside. Following after the 1969 season concluded, Carney took action. The majority of actors in his role wouldn't even think about it. He checked himself again. Entered the same mental health facility in Hartford. No controversy, no detention, simply a silent, thoughtful. He knew he was in trouble, so he moved. He recently received another Emmy in Wastel, dominating the game. However, he was more alcohol than before. This second stayed for around 4 months. He was working, just relaxing. He left in the middle of treatment. He joined the organization. Sessions that might subsequently impact how developed by Alcoholics Anonymous approach. He maintained diaries. He selected dissecting his own ideas using the same he provided Norton with specifics. He made the call, Irish curse, the trend in his family. That alcoholism. There was no drama. It was methodical. Even so, he didn't receive immediately sober. What he discovered in that hospital would eventually assist him. Give up alcohol permanently in 1974. Harry and Tanto movie shoot. Even though when he healed, something he never decided to go back. The Honeymooners itself, while Audrey Meadows and Gleason stayed in contact and participated in several Carney avoided reunions. No interviews, sentimental and devoid of comment. In 1996, Meadows passed away. Carney didn't say anything in public for that. Some referred to him as chilly, but 2 people who knew him didn't care about. It was a matter of survival. His life was too closely related to that chapter, connected to suffering. In her autobiography, Love 1994, Carney was called by Audrey Meadows and Alice, intelligent and kind, but she acknowledged they were never intimate. She felt that he felt bad about what she wasn't. Yes, in a previous interview, she thought perhaps he held himself responsible for something during those difficult filming years. Her remarks weren't sour. Rather, they were gentle and melancholy. She even considered entering getting in touch later in life. However, she didn't. Art had already departed from that. She stated he had left a piece of his life behind. However, it was more difficult to heal his personal life. Conflict. Art Carney believed in 1966 that Hugh was being given another chance. 1 year following their divorce and discharge from the hospital, he wed Jean Myers, his first wife, Barbara Isaac. She was no ordinary person. She did backstage work in television and recognized the pressure. Carney thought he could stabilize him. For some time it appeared to be true. He stopped taking medicines. His amphetamine use was discontinued. He glanced similar to a man starting over, but he was still under the influence of drinking. By the second marriage ended in 1977. It wasn't your typical divorce. It was Stellist Fisher in a life that's already full of harm. Carney had reached his late 50s. The majority of men of his age were considering slowing down, retired and contented, but he was coming apart. Barbara had supported him since his initial days of recuperation in the 60s, gave up at last. She had contributed to shows such as the Art Carney special and had faith in his ability. However, unable to endure the success no longer. The vows, the alcohol, their relapses, their affection had endured one collapse in 1965. It couldn't endure 10 more years of decline following her departure. Carney fell into extreme seclusion. According to friends, he often spent whole weekends in his apartment with empty bottles all around as well as pill containers. He seldom ever spoke to anybody. Occasionally he would simply speak to himself in front of the mirror. It was eerie. Picture the same individual who had dazzled Ed Norton. He once made America chuckle. He was all by himself now. Even his first marriage's children pulled it away. They were unsure on how to approach the guy he had grown into. When Paul asked Art Carney to play the lead in Harry and Tonto, the proposal didn't feel like strange. It seemed like a prank. Carney had devoted his life to making others laugh on TV, not traveling across the nation with a feline in an independent movie that hardly a budget of $1 million. He had only been previously in 2 forgettable pictures. At the age of 54. He was now being questioned in order to portray a weak 72-year-old man. He rejected it multiple times, phoning the travel narrative is dull. He here was too young, they said. However, the reality was drinking excessively for years had to get him quickly. He was hobbling, balding and gray from a previous military wound and seemed fairer than he was. Mazurki did not provide up something in Carney caught his eye. Others didn't. Anguish, isolation and silence power. Carney was the character. It received a forceful shove from his long tomato succeed. Al Pacino for Part 2 of The Godfather, Dustin Hoffman for Albert Finney and Lenny for The Orient Express murder. Everyone is a legend, but most of them didn't even appear. Given that Nicholson was the definite favorite, Glenda Jackson's reading the crowd gasped when Carney's name was announced. A few don't accept it. A man who is just now. Small movie credits had defeated Foricons, however. Success did not negate the subtle. Carney's scars were still deep. He had been overlooked years before for The Odd Couples movie adaptation. Despite the fact that he had played Felix Broadway's Anger is well known, the studio opted for Jack Lemmon. Carney as Al was suspected his mental health and alcohol use. He had lost the part due to a breakdown. It tormented him. Despite winning the Oscar, he struggled with regret and worry. Friends saw odd behaviors such as how he would carefully arrange the coins in a heap, large ones at the base, little ones in top, small indications that he wasn't entirely all right. The prize didn't make things better, broken, but it offered him another opportunity. In a startling step in 1980, Carney remarried his first wife, Jean Myers' wife. They had been 15 years of divorce. They were in a tile to 5 years of marriage, had brought 3 kids. Paul, Brian and Eileen. Addiction, however, had ruined it. Carney had entered a mental health facility. In the middle of the 1960s. Following the divorce, Hera married, but the marriage ended. Nevertheless, he and Jean maintained communication for 4 children. Art Carney was well known for never felt completely comfortable in thespian. Although the Honeymooners scazed him to become well known in the 1950s, he left that stardom behind and never turned around. When the television business began performing specialties for reunions in the Carney was the one major figure in the 1970s, and 1980s. Name is absent. It was Jackie Gleason. There was Audrey Meadows, however. Carney hair fused each time. He had the option to millions, but he turned them down. When questioned for that reason, he would simply say it was fantastic. But it was just a time. People, I don't live in the past. Others around him said it had nothing to do with money or pride. He simply did not wish to be Ed. Not even for a night. Norton again. In 1957, the manager had stated that Carney was prepared to take to the skies, alone. However, as time went on, it developed into something deep. According to Carney, sometimes when things finish, you're unaware of that the chapter is closed till you turn around and see that nobody changed the page. Thus, he came across The Honeymooners, a closed book, then something even more difficult to describe. February 3rd. Audrey Meadows passed away in 1996 from lung cancer. She was 73. The amusement the world responded immediately. There were tributes flooding in. Everyone had something to say. All but Art Carney. Not one a quote rather than a single sentence. Supporters were startled. Glean himself, who had passed several years since 1987, had commended his co-stars in his last interviews. Carney, meanwhile, said nothing at all. Some referred to it as cruel, while others remarked despite the cold. People who knew Carney believed it to be more complex. Within her, Meadows stated in her most recent interview that she hoped that they will speak once more in the future. She hoped to believe they were resentful of one another and another. She claimed that occasionally quiet ice louder than a dispute, and perhaps it was, she thought Carney placed the blame on himself, seeking something that she never completed, and she believed it was painful for him to bear reminded of his former self. That perhaps silence wasn't a sign of rejection, perhaps it was regret. Following victory, Harry and Tonto won the 1975 Oscar. Carney withdrew even more from the spotlight. He stopped drinking, began antibus therapy, and led a peaceful life apart from Hollywood. He behaved in AOR the movies, Firestarter, and The Thing. 1984, Muppets Take Manhattan, but never again sought celebrity. His final motion picture appeared in Last Action Hero in 1993. His the movie's last sentence, "I'm out of here." It was the final time viewers ever caught a glimpse of him on TV, while other elderly celebrities attended conventions. And Carney did not attend any he did not conduct interviews. He wasn't a poser for cameras. He had no desire to be regarded as a star. He desired to be adorned. He wed his first wife again, Jean, following a divorce and a short-lived second marriage. They survived in Westbrook, Connecticut. Together had devoted his days to reading, gardening, and savoring the silence. According to friends, he went resentful. At last he felt at ease, and it had taken decades to attain that peace. And November 9, 2003, 5 days following his Art Carney died at the age of 5 calmly while he slept. Natural reasons, no drama, no scandals, simply a peaceful conclusion to a life that was once chaotic. He had remained sober for over 3 decades. He continued to use antibus to ensure he didn't trip back. His funeral was discreet, much like his manner of living. He was laid to rest in Old Saybrook's Riverside Cemetery. Follows Dagan, who was going to die in 2012. His Devon Carney, his grandson, entered politics. And currently works in the Connecticut General Assembly. The family name persisted, and although Art Carney didn't publicly embrace the Honeymooners once more, people close to him claimed he made before the end find peace with it. He might have never spoken it aloud, yet that the agony had subsided. The devils had vanished. All that was left was a man who had at last managed to coexist with himself and quietly depart on his own terms.